Welcome back. I want to start today by looking at a map and, not just glancing at it, but really zooming in on one specific, incredibly tense corner of the Caribbean.
Right.
If you look at the water separating the United States from its neighbor to the south, you find, a geographical riddle.
It really is a riddle. We are talking about the Florida Straits.
Exactly. The distance between Key West and Havana is what? Roughly 180 kilometers?
Which is nothing. I mean, in the grand scheme of the planet, that's a rounding error.
It's effectively nothing. To put it in perspective, that's shorter than driving from New York City to Philadelphia.
You could fly it in the time it takes to listen to a couple of pop songs.
Yes.
It's right there.
It is like two streets in the same neighborhood. But, and this is the thing, despite that physical intimacy, these two places might as well be in different dimensions. I'm talking, of course, about the United States and Cuba. And the reason we have this map out today is because that tiny strip of blue water is boiling over again.
It is the neighborhood feud that just refuses to resolve. On one side, you've got the United States, the global superpower.
The heavyweight champion.
And on the other, you have this island that for 70 years now, has been this stubborn kid on the block who just refuses to surrender to the street's tough guy.
No matter how much pressure is applied. And right now, in January 2026, that tough guy is losing his patience. We are looking at a stack of sources today, government docs, intel analysis, economic reports, that paint a pretty intense picture.
A very intense picture. President Trump has just issued a new executive order declaring a national emergency regarding Cuba.
And that sounds serious.
This is a major escalation, and I think we need to be very clear right off the bat.
Yeah.
This isn't just, campaign rhetoric. This isn't just a mean tweet.
Or a diplomatic slap on the wrist.
No. We are seeing a tangible structural shift in strategy that really changes the physics of this whole conflict.
So our mission for this deep dive is to figure out why now? Why is this heating up to a boiling point again in 2026?
Okay.
We're going to look at the 70-year-old trauma, and that is the specific word the research uses that keeps the U.S. obsessed with this island.
And we're going to analyze the survival mechanics that have kept the Cuban regime afloat when, frankly, every single expert predicted it would sink decades ago.
And ultimately, we have to face the big question the sources are posing. Is this it? Is the last fortress finally crumbling?
That's the question.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with what you called the new squeeze. What is actually happening right now? Because I feel like we hear sanctions on Cuba every other year. It's almost background noise.
It is.
So what makes this 2026 executive order different?
It comes down to the mechanism. That's the key word here. Yesterday, President Trump didn't just give a speech. He signed a presidential executive order.
Declaring a national emergency.
Yes. And that sounds dramatic, but what it actually does legally is act like a skeleton key for the presidency.
How so?
By declaring a national emergency, he can bypass Congress entirely.
No vote, no debate.
Nothing. He doesn't need a bill. He can just expand sanctions and tariffs with a single signature.
Wow.
And the specific target here is, it's fascinating and it's brutal. He isn't just banning U.S. companies from trading with Cuba. That's been the status quo for 60 years.
Right. That's old news.
He is targeting third countries.
So this is about secondary sanctions.
Precisely. It's extraterritorial. The order targets companies in, say, Europe, South America, Asia, anyone who supplies oil or energy infrastructure to Cuba.
Okay, let's break that down for the listener, because this is where it gets really interesting. If I'm a Spanish energy company, for example, and I send a shipment of diesel to Havana,
the U.S. Treasury Department can now hit you. And not just with tariffs, but more importantly, they can freeze you out of the U.S. financial system.
They're weaponizing the U.S. dollar. We hear that phrase a lot. What does it mean in simple terms?
Sure. Think of the U.S. dollar as the operating system for global trade. It's like Windows or iOS. Most international oil contracts are settled in dollars. Most maritime insurance is underwritten by firms that touch the U.S. banking system. So if the U.S. says, hey, if you touch Cuba, we are revoking your license to use our dollar operating system, what happens to that company?
They
True.
effectively go out of business.
It's a financial death sentence.
So it's a siege. It's a modern digital version of a medieval siege where you just surround the castle and wait.
That's a perfect analogy. And the justification given in the order is that the Cuban government harms the U.S. by supporting enemy nations.
Yeah.
But if you look at the subtext, the goal is explicit. Trump made a very specific prediction.
What was that?
He said, Cuba will soon go bankrupt.
That is not a random throwaway line.
No. According to our sources, it's a pre-announced result. It is the intended outcome of a mechanism designed to cause total collapse without the U.S. ever having to drop a single bomb.
And if we look at the reports from the ground from early 2026, it looks like that mechanism is working. The sources describe the situation on the island as catastrophic.
It's the fuel flow. When you cut that, daily life just locks up. Imagine your own city with no fuel.
Can't.
We're seeing reports of massive power cuts, blackouts, lasting 18 to 20 hours a day.
20 hours, that's basically living in the dark.
It is. And when you lose power like that, industrial production just falls off a cliff. Factories can't run.
Refrigeration fails.
And the transportation system is basically collapsed. No gas for the buses.
I saw one report saying public transit in Havana is at something like 10% capacity.
Right. You can't run a country if people can't get to work and goods can't get to markets. And the one lifeline they used to have, tourism, is snapped.
That was the big cash cow, right? All the European and Canadian tourists.
Huge. For years, it brought in billions in hard currency. That's how they bought food on the international market. But the numbers now, compared to 2018, they've fallen off a cliff. The sources call it a disastrous state.
So you have a country that is dark, immobile, and broke. It feels like we are watching a slow motion car crash. But here's where I want to pivot, because this is the part that always confuses me.
Why does the United States care so much? I mean, seriously, Cuba is a small island. It's poor. It's not a global military threat anymore. Why is the president of the United States obsessed with it?
That is the million-dollar question.
Why expend this much political capital on crushing a neighbor that, let's be honest, isn't a peer competitor?
To understand that, you have to peel back the layers of history. You can't just look at 2026. You have to realize that for the U.S. establishment, Cuba isn't just a country, it's a trauma.
A trauma. That is a strong word for geopolitics.
But it's accurate. If you look at the naked truth, as the sources call it, of the relationship before 1959, it explains everything. Under the Batista dictatorship, Cuba wasn't really seen as a separate sovereign nation.
It was an extension.
It was the backyard. U.S. companies owned the best land, the banks, the big tourism centers.
Right.
Havana wasn't just a capital city. It was a playground. It was a hub for gambling, entertainment, money laundering. You had the mafia, the casinos, all intertwined with American capital. It was profitable and it was under control. And then comes 1959. Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, the bearded guys coming down from the mountains.
And that revolution wasn't just a change in management. It was an amputation. Overnight, America's dominance was severed. Castro's government started nationalizing everything.
Factories, ports, banks.
All of it. Assets that American companies thought were theirs forever were suddenly seized.
So it wasn't just about communism versus capitalism. It was about losing property, losing control.
And losing face. That is crucial because the U.S. tried to take it back and they failed spectacularly.
You're talking about the Bay of Pigs.
The Bay of Pigs in 1961. This is the origin of the trauma. The CIA trained Cuban exiles, armed them, sent them to the island. And the whole plan was based on this one assumption.
That the people would rise up.
They thought the Cuban regime was fragile and hated. They thought they just had to light the match and the whole country would explode in rebellion.
But it didn't.
The uprising never happened. The Cuban army didn't disintegrate. They fought back. The invasion force was pinned down on the coast, scattered, killed, or captured. It was a humiliation.
A total defeat.
Right under America's nose. And then a year later, it gets even worse. You get the Cuban Missile Crisis. Suddenly, this rebellious little island isn't just annoying. It's hosting Soviet nuclear missiles that can hit Washington, D.C.
And that's the trauma right there. The realization that you completely lost control of your backyard.
That is it. The lesson the U.S. learned deep in its bones was, unless Cuba is fully controlled, it remains a potential threat. It's an exception in the hemisphere that cannot be tolerated. And that logic, it hasn't changed.
Not in 70 years.
Whether it's 1962 or 2026, the goal's the same.
Sure.
Regain control.
So fast forward back to today. You have this immense pressure fueled by this historical grudge. The economy is in ruins, the lights are out, and yet the regime is still there.
It is.
And that's what I don't get. If it's this bad, why hasn't it fallen? Most governments would have collapsed weeks ago under this kind of strain. What is keeping them upright?
This is where we get into the internal dynamics, the so-called survival mechanics. The sources describe something they call state of emergency psychology.
What does that mean?
It means the Cuban state has built a society that is used to survival, not welfare. For decades, the people haven't expected prosperity. They expected a struggle.
They're hardened to it.
They rely on rationing systems for basic food and fuel. The system is designed to distribute scarcity, not abundance. But there's also this paradox here that makes it so complicated.
What's that?
The sources point out that while Cuba is poor, income is below the regional average, it has social indicators that are shockingly high.
Right, I saw that. Literacy is close to 99%.
Universal access to healthcare. Infant mortality rates lower than in many richer Latin American countries.
So the state, even with nothing, tries to keep that basic social floor from collapsing.
It buys them a certain amount of resilience. But we have to be realistic. That resilience has been tested before. The sources talk about a few breaking points.
Right.
The first one was the 90s, when the Soviet Union collapsed.
Yeah.
Cuba lost its economic oxygen overnight. That was the worst period. No energy, no food.
The special period.
Exactly. And the regime didn't collapse. It evolved. It got more closed, but also more pragmatic. Then you had the Obama era. Around 2014, that was a breaking point in the other direction.
The brief moment of normalization.
It was a moment to breathe.
Yeah.
But it wasn't the new normal. As soon as Trump arrived, he reversed it. And now, in 2026, he's accelerating that pressure.
But there's a difference between the 90s and today, isn't there? The sources mention a fragility now that might not have been there before.
Yes, and this is critical. There's this romantic narrative about Cuba being self-sufficient, but it's a myth. Cuba imports 80% of its food.
80%. That is terrifying if you are being blockaded.
It is totally dependent on energy imports. An island economy that cannot feed itself and has no oil cannot survive a total blockade forever. The survival artist has a limited supply of paint.
And the people. They aren't just sitting around. They are voting with their feet.
This is the most startling statistic in the entire target for me. We're looking at demographic collapse.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Historically, we always hear Cuba has a population of around 11 million.
Right. But independent sources now say that as of 2025, the population has fallen below 10 million.
That is a massive drop in a very short time.
It's a hemorrhage. You have mass migration and rapid aging. The young people, the workforce, they're leaving.
So when we talk about the fall of the regime, we shouldn't be picturing, Libya or Iraq. Not tanks in the streets.
No, and the sources are very clear on this. The dissolution in Cuba doesn't look like an explosion. It looks like evaporation.
Evacuation.
People don't pour into the streets to fight the army, though protests do happen, like in 2021, and they are suppressed. Instead, people just leave the country.
It's a quiet collapse.
It is. Which brings us to the end game. If the U.S. wins, what does that actually look like?
Right. If Trump's prediction comes true and Cuba goes bankrupt, does the U.S. send in the Marines?
No. In the modern world, taking over doesn't mean military occupation. It's smarter than that. It means causing an economic collapse so complete that it produces an internal dissolution. And then you fill that void.
Under the name of market integration.
It sounds very corporate, doesn't it? The goal is to turn Cuba from the opposite shore, that defiant enemy, back into the backyard.
So McDonald's in Havana.
U.S. banks, U.S. tourism companies, U.S. agriculture, reclaiming the assets and the influence that were lost in 1959.
And for Trump specifically, the sources outline two big wins here.
First, the psychological victory. He gets to be the one who finally dissolved the last resisting symbol, the last fortress of communism in the hemisphere. It's a huge legacy play.
And second,
economic redistribution, opening up a new market right next door. It's about money as much as it is about ideology.
This brings up a really provocative thought for me. We're talking about a superpower squeezing this fragile island, a population that's melting away. If the US wins, if they finally break the fortress, what is left to conquer?
That is the haunting question the sources leave us with. The US views Cuba as this trauma to be healed, this prize to be won back. But if the takeover happens through economic strangulation and demographic drainage, if the people have all left and the infrastructure has crumbled into dust, you have to wonder.
You might plant the flag, but who is there to salute it?
You might open the market, but who's there to buy the products? It's the difference between conquering a nation and inheriting a graveyard.
A hollow victory.
Could be. The ideological need to crush the last fortress might end up destroying the very thing they say they want to integrate.
It really makes you think. We get so caught up in the who is winning that we forget to ask what the game is actually doing to the players.
And to the people living on the board.
Exactly. We started this looking at a map, seeing how close these two places are, 180 kilometers. But after this deep dive, the history, the trauma, the suffering, it feels like the distance has never been greater.
Geographical distance is easy to measure. Ideological distance, that could be infinite.
Well, that is a heavy note to end on, but an important one. We'd love to hear what you think. Is this strategy of pressure until collapse the only way, or are we watching a tragedy unfold?
Definitely something to mull over.
We'll catch you on the next one.